So our second session is a fireside chat on the AfroPean identity in film, historical figures and contemporary expression. And we have with us a multi-hyphenate called Daphne Di Cinto from Italy. She's an actress, producer and screenwriter. And we have Welket... What? Oh, can I remind you, we have an after party next door, just over there from 7 p.m. And that's where all our guests should be, should you want to continue conversations. Where was I? Welket Bungué, who's also a multi-hyphenate from Guinea-Bissau and Portugal, who's an actor, producer and director. And the conversation will be moderated by Carmen Thompson of We Are Parable. Please welcome. Daniel, do we have another mic?
Hi, everyone. Is it working? No? Hello? I see what Tambe says. You can't really hear it. It doesn't sound like it's on. I have no idea how we're going to follow that. That was very spicy. Can you guys bring that energy? If you can disagree with each other on some things.
We'll do our best.
Really do our best. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I'm super excited to have Daphne and Welket here. Have you got your mic? No, Welket, you've got one there now. I'm aware that we're short for time, so we'll jump straight into this. I guess to set the scene, it's a big topic and we've only got half an hour. But I'm going to kind of jump off with how Tambe started, because I think it's interesting to speak about these terms that we're talking about. So I wondered, we're talking about AfroPean identity on film. I wonder if you maybe, because AfroPean is a really expansive term. There's so many different experiences of being in Europe, living in Europe, being of African descent. Maybe you could just both kind of speak about what this term means to you in terms of your own work, how useful you find it, and why you think it's important to have a conversation around this specific identity when talking about filmmaking. Maybe I'll just jump to you, Daphne.
Sure. I feel like AfroPean really is kind of a new word. We've started hearing more of it in the past few years. I'm Italian. I grew up, was born and raised in Italy, and I spent my childhood, teenage years, and early adulthood being reminded constantly how I never really belonged to my country. I feel like I had to move abroad to find the pieces of my identity. And AfroPean is a word that really encapsulates how I feel, but also I think it's interesting because when I meet other AfroPeans, I revel in the beauty of the fact that our experiences can be so different, and the fact that we don't even need to be born in the same place, beyond the fact that, of course, Europe is a big continent and there are many countries. But our stories travel in such different ways. And I've recently started talking about the diversity within the diversity. And I think that in the AfroPean community, the stories that are enclosed in it have the potential to really expand and explode in the search and the celebration of these multiple journeys that see us call each other AfroPeans because we recognize a common ground or a common foundation. I'm also going to add how I think it's a beautiful word because for so much time, people that shared this background really didn't have a way to define themselves to the world, and now we do, and with the help of social media as well, we really can build these images and these narratives that root us in the countries that we call home, even though these countries, most of the time, don't really want to call us part of them. But we're here to build that and swift that into our roots being celebrated first and foremost in the countries that we call home, and then in the rest of the world.
Wow, what a wonderful way to bring us into this conversation, Daphne. Welket, maybe just to throw it to you, does any of this resonate? What does this word mean to you and your work?
For sure. First of all, I am very, very honored to be here today with you. It's the result of becoming an European citizen as well, because I born in Guinea-Bissau in 1988. Then I moved to Portugal when I had 3 years old. I became a Portuguese citizen. And then since 2012, I have been traveling to Brazil. And up to now, I have been there for over 10 years or 11, which makes me feel like a Brazilian as well. And then since 2019, I have been coming back and forth to Germany. And then I decided to stay based here since 2020. The year that the pandemic started, okay? And to me, this term or this concept, first of all, it makes Europe more interesting, yeah? Because the relation between Europe and Africa or the South Hemisphere started for many reasons that most of us knows a long time ago. And I think to accept this concept of Afro-European is to acknowledge that Europe has different bodies, different identities, you know, and it encapsulates at least these two understandings to me. One of them is the possibility of being in transit. This is what gave me the possibility to be in transit along the years, and this was mandatory to me to become an actor that can be sitting here today with you, because I raised in Portugal and our industry is relatively small, so that they didn't give us enough space to perform on our best, because they gave us characters that would underrepresent our light, our quality as artists. And then the fact of being African, it's important because to be an African is not just to belong a so-called country. I have my roots on my tribe. I'm a Balanta descendant. So to accept this expression is to accept that somehow along the history, which can be read from this hegemonic point of view of the history, or from the resistance point of view of history, which is mine, which is of most of you that are sitting here. So AfroPean can be accepted from this perspective, and from that starting point, we could understand what this consciousness brought to the European contemporary landscape on arts and culture and so on and so on.
Daphne, I saw you nodding. I just want to make sure, do you have a response to what Welket said, or I move on to the next question? Okay.
You can go to the next one, yeah.
Because there's so much there. And I guess perhaps you're talking about the history. I guess that's also part of the name of this panel, and maybe that's a good place to start. Because like you say, this is a new term, and people are finding a community in it. But people of African descent have existed in Europe way back into history, and you wouldn't know that looking at the way that the European history has been written. So I wonder, maybe you could reflect a bit on why, I know, Daphne, historical narratives and kind of mining history for stories of people of African descent and bringing them to light is so important in the work that you do.
Absolutely. I mean, this is my favorite part. When we talk about not existing in the history is really what we've been taught by the education system that we had to attend to. I was well into my 30s when I found out about the character that is the protagonist of my directorial debut, which is called Il Moro, the Moor, and talks about the real and hidden story of Alessandro de' Medici, who was the first Duke of Florence in 1530 and the first man of African descent to become head of state in Renaissance Europe. How did I go through my whole school years without knowing this? I mean, I remember being at school and of course, the only thing you study at school related to African history is the slave trade. And I remember being the only Black kid in class and teachers starting, today we're gonna, start studying the slave trade. And the whole class would do this. And I'd be like, do you want a mirror? Because what are we talking about here? And I guess that when I found out about this super important character that exists within European history, I asked myself a few questions. Well, how would the formation of my own identity would have been different if I had known that this character existed when I was in school? But maybe even more importantly, how would the whole nation, how would the society, how would the continent be different if everybody knew that this character existed and like him, so many other characters exist within European history? Because I hear very often why European people saying that Europe and Africa really don't have a connection, whereas especially in the Mediterranean countries, there is an incredible and beautiful and interesting intersection throughout centuries. And these stories form who we are today as people, whether you identify as white or you identify as Black. So I guess the answer to that question is it's incredibly important to bring out these stories, these histories, and get them to become common knowledge, popular culture, because the image is such a powerful tool. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Mm-hmm. And if we start this from early enough, we're going to build a society that where we won't need to sit down and have these conversations, but we can just sit down and just have conversations centered on just the artistry of our work. I also feel like the collaborations intersectionally would just be more interesting and richer and deeper. I remember, I started out with the research on Alessandro de' Medici, and as I researched him, I found out about all these other characters that existed and I didn't know of. And I remember thinking, my next project is going to be about this one person. And then I got to a point where I was like, a lifetime would not be enough to tell all these stories. So, Europe is big. There are a lot of filmmakers, and I hope we can all celebrate these stories and make them known to the rest of the world.
Yeah. Welket, I'd like to throw to you the same question, and maybe also added on. I know, but just because you've had such a long career in the industry already, I wonder if you could speak to how you think the way that the people of African descent have been represented or not represented in history has shaped your kind of experience of coming up through the industry as well.
You had a very beautiful, speech now. And yes, it resonates on me, of course. For example, just recently, 2 years ago, I got to discover the book from a very well-known teacher from Mali. The title of the book is Searching for Africa, if I'm not wrong. What is his name? I forgot, but that's the title. So it's a very important discourse on African or Black related filmography. And through that filmography, it tells the history of the foundations of cinema in the African continent, and therefore how did that influenced the filmmakers either in the US or in some Western African countries. Thanks to the huge amount of books that are being translated in Brazil, I could read this book. But this book was written in 1992 or 1994, for example. I just started my training as an actor in 2006 as an amateur, and then I did the degree from 2009 to 2012. And I thought, for the same reasons you mentioned, at university we learned more food, books, and artists from Europe, neither related to the theater or to the acting like the actors or through the cinema. I had no direct access to this, to this treasure, like to these names, And of course, when you start to build yourself and to try to understand what kind of artists you are becoming and how does your work make impact, not just in the surrounding you are part of, but we as African descendants, we have always an imputed responsibility towards those who stayed in the continent and that imagine that the best place to be it's in Europe or in the Western world. We are always attached to this responsibility. And then to study for so many years, not knowing these pearls, okay, from your continent, it's very difficult because then it puts you on disadvantage towards the others, So on that sense, I think that it's very, very important to tell stories that are rooted in the African, not just narratives, but history as well. It's a matter of bringing just balance and what is reasonable for a culture that says that is on the top of the wave of what we understand as development. Okay? So how would you, inhabit or share a space and convey a certain responsibility for those people who don't have access or don't cultivate their own story? They will be somehow torn and they cannot deal with you as an equal. Maybe if you want to keep this disadvantage, you will teach at the university that way, so that the truth is veiled to the people. So these are the more, formal reasons that let me think that it's very important to tell other narratives, not just the African-related narratives. All the narratives that have been suppressed somehow, they need to be lifted up. And, we have kids, we have children, they go to the school. So I think even if there is film productions or books or audiovisual contents that celebrates the diversity, and this, in this case, the African diversity, because Africa is diverse, okay? Not just in terms of identity, but in terms of identification as well, you know? So as long as you do this, you will be building a more, responsible and connected society, because to those who are rising, I think it's very important to have clear references of people who can be wherever they want to be, you know, because this then means that there is a freedom of being in transit, of occupying certain spaces, and to have certain dialogues which are not specifically related to the importance of Black or African affirmation and so on and so on. There is more to do. There is more to celebrate and to cherish in life.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Can I add a tiny thing to this? Because I get so passionate about this conversation. I feel like sometimes the problem lies in the fact that in institutes of education and of culture, even in higher ones as universities, we still have educators that refuse to widen up their view and keep on holding so tight to this ancient way of teaching and of telling history that really puts white supremacy in the center of the conversation. And while, yes, we are seeing so many people and so many professors and teachers wanting to expand, a lot of people that are in the highest positions in these institutes still want to hold on. And I think this also translates to movie making and how it's really important to have in key decision-making positions people of African descent and people who are allies and really understand the importance of these stories and the right context in which to share them and how to share them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that brings me on to my next question, because I think I'm so blown away by what both of you said, and I think the case for the impact, especially, you know, in rooms like this, we understand of what the importance of telling these stories. But I think, like you say, these structures, these institutions that are responsible for funding these films and getting them out into the world, purposely or not, are keeping them out. And often a lot of the arguments is that there's not an audience for them, they're not commercial. And when you're trying to shift the narrative and, you know, really break these structures, you know, it's what I wonder if you could both speak to, in your kind of context, your experience of trying to make the case for making this work and with funders and actually make, you know, get it made. We all know the importance of telling these stories, but we need funders, we need backers, we need support, we need distribution. What's your experience of trying to get these stories told?
Well, personally, as I said, Il Moro is my directorial debut, and I went the 100% independent route for that. And I was lucky enough to find people that believed in the project, and we were able to do a period drama for a very small budget. But I definitely don't want to be doing that for my next project. So the way I've approached pitching my projects in this past year or so really has been looking for people that share my same ethos, because funds are out there, but it's about who you're going to partner with, and if they see the same vision that you're seeing, and if they want to pass the same message that you're passing. Because, you know, in the previous panel, they were talking about how, you know, commercial and the art form may not go together. I'm a huge believer that they do, and especially stories that that have this kind of relevance. They can both have the depth and they can have the commercial value. They can have an incredible commercial value because these stories are untold and because people are curious to know them. And in doing so, you can widen the audience's perspective, and that's something that is going to come back even in a monetary value. And the social impact of these films, I feel, also goes hand in hand with the funding and monetary return that they can have. Il Moro was just a tiny indie short film, but when it came out, I wrote a petition letter to the Council of Florence because in the resting place of the Medici family, which is in this beautiful chapel in Florence, in the center of Florence, all the Medici men are buried there, Alessandro de' Medici included, except he was the only person not mentioned at all whatsoever in the whole chapel, in the whole place. I mean, his tomb is sculpted by Michelangelo. How? What? Okay. So, so when the film came out and we started getting a little bit of buzz, so I wrote this petition letter to the council essentially going, hey, are you going to write his name in front of his tomb? Because it's been 500 years. Yeah. I was lucky enough. So my initial idea was getting many people to sign the petition and then sending, but I knew somebody that worked in the Council of Florence, who's also a person of African descent, and I sent it to her and said, do you think this would work? And she goes, yeah, send me everything. The week after, they were discussing it in the council. Apparently, there were people from right-wing parties that said something along the lines, well, why would we do that? We can't do it because you guys are trying to Africanize Europe. Like, how can you Africanize a person who's of African descent? What? Anyway, the petition was accepted and it took them a full year. But now Alessandro's name is in the information panel in front of the chapel. Thank you. And I mean, this is and this is a short indie. Can you imagine what a full feature film or a full series can do? So, yeah.
Yeah, congratulations, honestly. Just out of curiosity, where can people watch the film? Because I'm personally really curious about watching.
So we're working on finding the right path to make it accessible to the public. But please follow us on Instagram. It's at Il Moro Film. ILMORO film, and we'll post there all the updates.
Okay. Yeah. We're running out of time, but Welket, I'd like to throw to you with the same question, but also I'm interested in, again, just reflecting on your career. I wonder if you could speak to what changes have you seen since first coming into the industry, and do you think it's easier to make the case to kind of tell these stories?
I don't know if it's easy. Definitely it's not, but it's possible. The thing is that we have to fit ourselves within our own average possibility dimension. This means that if we have the chance to make a collaboration with people who are not formally part of the industry, but they can add something in terms of production or in terms of equipment or in terms of distribution to our project, we should try to connect with them and not make our content dependent on who would be interested in consuming it, because then it reduces the outreach of your project. And the most important is to never forget that we can be simultaneous. We don't have to be either one thing or another, you know? And that's the, how do you say, the pearl and the most, to me, important thing of being, of having the freedom to be in transit, which means that we can be in connection with different cultures, with different people, with different perspectives. And to an art creative, this is highly relevant, you know? And that's why I think it's important to tell stories, to tell narratives independently of the place that you are from, you know? Because I think the biggest intention should be to connect your thoughts, your beliefs, and to somehow outreach other people that can, to whom this story may resonate, you know? Because if we are attached to the way the capitalistic system works, we would not be here. And when I say we, I'm saying all of us, because there is people here that I believe that understand how the capitalist system somehow narrow the idea of what is valuable or not, what can be seen, what can be told, you know. And to me, that is just a creation, you know, a programming, you know. And then just to sum up, one of the biggest, how do you say, experience I had as an actor was to have the chance to perform a lead role on a German film. I raised in Portugal. I didn't know how to say Brot in German. Okay? And then they did the casting call, and I was in Brazil at that time. And I did a self-tape speaking English and completely broken German from there. And then I came here. I got to meet the director and the other two actors, Yala Haase and Alba Schur. And we did this film. And the film did the premiere at the Berlinale in 2020. So why I'm telling this? Because the Germans, as it was a production, a mixed, ethnically, culturally wise mixed production company. They forged, they believed on this possibility, okay? And therefore, I came here and now I'm living here. This is not to romanticize the thing, but it's to show that it's clearly possible, the potentiality of bringing people together and making great things. That's why I believe we should stay here and tell our story.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and like all these sessions, this is just like an invitation to start a conversation, and just to reiterate the after party, come and have, continue this conversation. But I just want to say thank you so much, Welket and Daphne, for your insight, for the work that you're doing. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.